The champagne hit the marble floor before the screaming started. Mara Callahan didn't drop the tray because she was clumsy. She dropped it because she saw the man in the gray suit near exit C press 2 fingers to his ear and say, very quietly, "He's moving. Get the alarm ready." Nobody else in the Aurelian Hotel's grand ballroom heard him over the string quartet. Mara heard him because she had spent 6 years learning to read lips over the noise of a busy dining room, and because the words alarm and moving landed in her stomach like ice. 200 guests in black tie were laughing under crystal chandeliers, unaware that the ballroom had already been sealed into 2 possible outcomes. In one, the gala ended with dessert and a toast. In the other, it ended with a man everyone in this city was afraid to name walking out through the lobby doors into whatever was waiting for him there. That man was standing 11 feet away from Mara, sampling nothing, drinking nothing, one hand resting on the back of a chair he wasn't sitting in. Dante Moretti did not look like a man who ran half the ports and half the judges in Chicago. He looked bored. That was, Mara would later learn, the most dangerous thing about him. She was not supposed to know who he was. Waitresses at the Aurelian were briefed only on allergies and wine pairings, not on the fact that the private party in the East Wing belonged to the Moretti organization, or that the 2 hotel security men flanking the doors carried more than radios. But Mara had grown up in a house where her father came home smelling like gun oil and fear, and some knowledge never leaves the body once it's been planted there. The man in the gray suit moved toward the fire panel bolted beside the service corridor. Mara's tray was empty now. Shattered champagne flutes scattered like ice across the floor, and nobody had noticed yet that she hadn't moved to clean it up. She was watching his hand. He pulled the small brass key from his jacket, the kind hotel engineers carried, not the kind security guards were issued. Mara had refilled that engineer's coffee an hour earlier. He had complained his master key had gone missing from the break room. The alarm wasn't going to fail. It was going to work perfectly. That was the plan. Her legs moved before her mind finished the thought. She crossed the space between the shattered glass and Dante Moretti in 4 steps, ignoring the bodyguard who shifted his weight to block her, ignoring 6 years of training that said never approach the principal, never touch the client, never say anything except, "More wine, sir." "Don't go to the lobby," she said, close enough that only he could hear it, her voice shaking but her words exact. "The fire alarm is fake. They want you in the lobby." Dante Moretti's eyes came off his phone and landed on her face for the first time all evening. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the ballroom moved. Then the fire alarm tore through the chandeliers like a scream, and 200 people in black tie turned as one body toward the exits, and Mara Callahan realized she had just made herself impossible to ignore, to a man whose attention had killed people for far less. 3 weeks earlier, Mara Callahan's whole world had fit inside a budget she recalculated every Sunday night at her kitchen table. Rent. Her mother's blood pressure medication, the kind insurance only half covered. The community college tuition she paid 1 credit at a time, working toward a nursing license she wasn't sure she'd finish before she turned 30. She kept the numbers in a spiral notebook because spreadsheets felt like admitting the math would always be close. She was good at her job in the way people are good at things they can't afford to be bad at. She remembered which regulars were allergic to shellfish, which ones tipped in cash because they didn't want a paper trail, which ones needed their water glass refilled without being asked so they didn't have to interrupt a conversation. She noticed things. It was, in its own small way, a kind of vigilance she'd learned early, in a house where her father, a locksmith who did occasional work for people who needed doors opened that weren't theirs, taught her to read a room before she could read a menu. He'd been dead 9 years. Car accident, the police report said. Mara had stopped believing that particular sentence around the time she turned 20 and noticed nobody from his old crew ever mentioned his name again, not even at the funeral. The Aurelian Hotel paid better than the diner she'd worked before, and the private events paid best of all, because rich people tipped in percentages of numbers Mara couldn't otherwise imagine. 3 nights a week she served finance conferences and hospital fundraisers and twice now, closed-door parties for an organization the hotel staff called, only ever in the break room, only ever in whispers, the East Wing people. She had learned 2 rules fast. Never write down a name you overheard. Never look directly at the men who stood by the doors with their hands folded in front of them like they were praying, because they weren't. On the Tuesday before the gala, Mara had caught her co-worker Priya crying in the supply closet between shifts. Priya's brother owed money to someone, an amount that had stopped being a number and started being a threat, and the deadline was the same week her rent was due. Mara had covered 2 of Priya's tables without being asked and split her own tips down the middle at the end of the night, because it was the kind of thing you did for someone drowning, even when you were barely swimming yourself. Priya had grabbed her hand across the break room table and said, "I don't know how to fix this," and Mara had said, "You don't have to fix it alone," and meant it, though she had no idea yet how expensive that sentence would become. The night of the gala, Mara arrived early and found the East Wing's usual head of security, a heavy-set man named Ruiz who tipped generously and asked about her mother by name, replaced by 3 unfamiliar men in gray suits who did not tip and did not ask anything at all. They moved through the ballroom like they were mapping it, counting exits with their eyes instead of admiring the chandeliers, and one of them, the tallest, spent 4 full minutes standing beside the fire panel in the service corridor doing absolutely nothing that a hotel employee would ever need to do there. Mara noticed. She always noticed. It was, after all this time, closer to a compulsion than a skill. She might have said nothing. She had every reason to say nothing. Saying something to strangers who moved like that could cost a waitress her job, her safety, possibly more. But then the engineer Hal, a soft-spoken man who'd shown her photos of his granddaughter twice that week, patted his pockets in the hallway and said, half to himself half to Mara, "Damn it! My master key's gone. I had it an hour ago." That was the loose thread. Mara pulled it without meaning to. She watched the tall man in gray slip a small brass key from his jacket pocket 40 minutes later and walk, unhurried, toward the fire panel, and every instinct her father had ever hammered into her. Read the room before the room reads you. Went off like the alarm that hadn't rung yet. She had time to warn hotel management. She had time to call the police, who would arrive in 9 minutes on a good night, 20 on a bad one, long after whatever was planned for that lobby had already happened. She had time to walk away and pretend she'd seen nothing, the way she'd been trained to for 6 years. Instead she picked up an empty champagne tray and walked straight toward the most dangerous man in the room, because somewhere underneath the fear was a colder, older fact. Nobody had warned her father in time either, and she had spent 9 years wishing someone had. The alarm screamed through the ballroom and the room broke apart into panic in a way that would have looked, to a stranger, like chaos. It was not chaos. Mara understood that within the first 2 seconds, watching Dante Moretti's men move. Nobody ran for the lobby doors. Every single man in a dark suit who had been standing quietly along the walls all evening converged instead, smoothly, without a shouted order, on 3 points. The main ballroom exits, the service corridor, and the man Mara had just spoken to. A woman in red beside her grabbed her husband's arm and hissed, this way," steering him firmly away from the lobby toward the terrace doors, and Mara realized the woman wasn't a guest at all. "Nobody uses the lobby exit," Dante said. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The words traveled through his men like current through wire. 2 guards peeled off toward the double doors that led to the hotel's front lobby and simply stood in front of them, arms folded, an immovable wall of black wool, while 200 confused guests in evening wear were funneled instead toward the terrace and the east stairwell. "Sir." The tallest man in gray, the one who'd held the brass key, was already at Dante's shoulder. His face arranged into practiced calm. "Fire alarms tripped. We should move you out through the lobby. It's the fastest route to." "No." Dante didn't look at him. He was still looking at Mara. "We're not using the lobby tonight." Something crossed the gray-suited man's face, there and gone in under a second, but Mara caught it, the way she caught everything, a flicker of genuine surprise quickly buried. He hadn't expected to be overruled. He recovered fast, said something about protocol and safety, and Dante finally turned to him with an expression so mild it was somehow worse than shouting. "Marchetti, find out who let you bring 2 new men into my ballroom tonight. Then find me the building engineer." His voice hadn't changed at all, and that was exactly what made 3 separate men near him go very still, the way people go still around whether they've learned to fear. The alarm cut off 40 seconds later. Someone from hotel security or someone from Dante's own people, Mara genuinely didn't know which. And in the sudden ringing silence that followed, the 200 guests began the awkward business of laughing off their own fear, reassembling in clusters near the terrace, already turning the moment into a story they'd tell at brunch. Nobody had gone near the lobby. Nobody but Mara and the 3 men in grey seemed to understand that anything unusual had happened at all. A hand closed, not roughly, around Mara's upper arm before she'd gone 3 steps back toward the kitchen. Not Dante's hand. One of his men, a broad-shouldered man with a scar through one eyebrow who introduced himself, later as Cesare. "He wants to talk to you." "I have tables," Mara said. Which was true and also the stupidest possible thing to say to a man built like a filing cabinet in a hotel where the fire alarm had just been faked as bait for an assassination. Cesare didn't smile, but something in his face suggested he'd heard people say stranger things to him before, right before their lives changed completely. She was walked, not dragged, to a service alcove off the main ballroom, half hidden by a folding screen of gilt and silk that some decorator had clearly never imagined being used for interrogation. Dante Moretti was already there, jacket still buttoned, tie still straight, looking like a man who had simply stepped out of a party rather than a man who had just survived, or avoided, whatever the lobby had been prepared for. "Say it again," he said. "Exactly how you said it the first time." Mara's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go. "The fire alarm is fake. They wanted you in the lobby." "How did you know?" "I read lips." One of the new security men said it into a radio, by exit C, before anyone touched the panel. She swallowed. "And your building engineer's master key went missing an hour before the alarm went off. I served him coffee when he told me." Dante studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that made most people's skin crawl, though Mara found herself standing straighter under it instead of shrinking, some old stubbornness of her father's rising up through her spine. "What's your name?" "Mara Callahan." "You work here every night?" 3 nights a week." She hesitated, then added, because some part of her refused to be handled. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw. And I'm not going to pretend I don't want to know why 3 strangers in grey suits wanted you dead in a hotel lobby either." For the first time since the champagne glasses had shattered on the marble floor, Dante Moretti almost smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Nothing about him tonight was going to reach his eyes, not fully, not yet. But Cesare, standing by the folding screen, would say later that it was the first time in 3 years he'd seen the Don look at anyone like they were a fact he hadn't accounted for. "Cesare," Dante said without breaking eye contact with Mara, "find out everything about her. Tonight. And make sure she gets home safe." "That in order to protect her?" Cesare asked. "Or in order to watch her?" "Both," Dante said. "Starting now." Both turned out to mean a black SUV idling outside her apartment building for the rest of that week, and a knock on her door 2 mornings later from Cesare, holding a garment bag and an expression that dared her to refuse him. "He wants you at the Moretti offices. Says it's about your safety. I have a shift at 11. You don't anymore." He called the Aurelian. "Told them you're on paid leave until this is resolved." Cesare said it like it was obviously good news, and maybe, in his world, it was. "He can't just." Mara stopped because clearly he could and had. "I need that job. You'll get paid double what they pay you. Every week. Until this is over. I don't want his money." Cesare studied her the way he might study a door he wasn't sure how to open. "Everybody wants his money." "I want my job," Mara said, and something in her voice must have carried enough of her father's old stubbornness, because Cesare actually paused before answering. "Take it up with him yourself then." She did. The Moretti offices occupied the top 2 floors of a building that called itself, on the directory in the lobby, a private investment firm, which fooled absolutely nobody who'd grown up in this city. Dante Moretti was behind a desk with no papers on it when she was shown in, sleeves rolled to the forearm, a man clearly built for stillness who had learned, over decades, to disguise that stillness as patience. "You took my job away," Mara said before he could speak first. "I removed you from a building where 3 men just tried to kill me in a room you were serving champagne in. That wasn't your decision to make. It was exactly my decision to make. You're a witness now. To them that makes you a problem." He said it flatly, without cruelty, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. "I'd rather you be an inconvenience to me than a body in a river. That's not protection. That's control with better manners." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, something closer to recognition, like she'd said a sentence he'd been waiting years for someone to say to him. "Noted," he said, which was not an apology, but wasn't nothing either. "I want my job back. I want to make my own decisions about my own life. If your men want to sit outside my building so I don't get shot for something I saw, fine. That's a fair trade for warning you. But you don't get to decide where I work." Dante leaned back. "Do you know what happens to people who cross my organization, Ms. Callahan?" "I have a fairly educated guess," she said, thinking of her father, of the years of silence, of a police report she'd never believed. "I've had one in my family before." That landed harder than she expected it to. Dante's jaw tightened, and for a moment the room's careful stillness cracked, just slightly, just enough for Mara to see something underneath it. Grief, maybe old and well-worn, the kind that had been folded into a man's posture for so long it looked like discipline instead of loss. "Your father," he said. It wasn't a question. "Danny Callahan, blacksmith, died in a car accident 9 years ago. According to the report, nobody bothered to investigate." Dante didn't answer that directly. Instead he said quietly, "You can keep your job. Cesari's men will rotate outside the Aurelian on your shifts. If anything feels wrong, anything, you call him before you call anyone else." He slid a card across the desk with a single number on it. "That's not control. That's the only thing I have to offer someone who just saved my life and won't take my money for it." Mara took the card because refusing it felt more like pride than principle, and pride wasn't a luxury she'd ever fully been able to afford. 3 days later, on a Thursday shift that should have been unremarkable, a man in an expensive coat sat at table 6 and ordered the same thing 3 times, correcting the kitchen loudly each time, drawing every eye in the dining room toward Mara in a way that felt deliberately engineered rather than genuinely dissatisfied. When she finally set his 4th plate down, he caught her wrist, not hard, but enough to make his point. "You're the girl who talks to Dante Moretti now," he said, smiling with his mouth and nothing else. "Careful. Girls who get useful to men like him have a way of becoming liabilities to men like me." She pulled her wrist free, steady on the outside, shaking underneath. "I don't know who you are." "You will." He left without paying. 15 minutes later, 2 of Cesari's men were standing in the parking lot beside his car, and by the time Mara finished her shift, word had already reached the Moretti offices, because Dante himself was waiting outside the Aurelian staff entrance, coat collar up, jaw set in a way she was beginning to recognize as barely restrained fury dressed up as calm. "Who was he?" Dante said. Not a question. A demand dressed politely. "He didn't give a name. He knew about the gala. He knew I talked to you now." She hesitated. "He said girls who get useful to men like you become liabilities to men like him." Dante's silence stretched long enough that Cesare, standing a few feet off, actually shifted his weight, uneasy. "Get her home," Dante said finally. 2 men on the apartment tonight, not 1. Then to Mara, quieter. You didn't have to warn me at that gala. You could have walked away. I need you to understand that whatever this becomes, I never wanted you standing this close to it. I'm already standing this close to it, Mara said. The question is whether you're going to let me see the rest of it, or just protect me from a distance until I stop being useful and start being a problem you have to manage. Dante didn't answer. But that night, for the first time, he didn't send her home in a car alone. He rode with her the entire way, silent the whole time, and got out at her building only long enough to check the stairwell himself before he'd let his men stand down. The revelation came from an object Mara had been carrying for 9 years without understanding what it opened. It was a key. A small, oddly shaped brass key her father had given her the week before he died, sealed in an envelope she wasn't supposed to open until she was 18. A habit of secrecy she'd assumed then was just how locksmiths thought, that everything worth protecting deserved its own hidden mechanism. She'd kept it in her jewelry box for years, more sentiment than object, until the night Dante insisted on walking her upstairs after the man from table 6, and his eyes caught on it sitting in a small dish by her door. He went very still. "Where did you get that?" "My father. He gave it to me right before he died." Mara frowned at the change in his face. "Why? Can I see it?" She handed it over, and watched a man who had, in the space of a week, ordered guards repositioned and enemies denied access with nothing more than a flat sentence, hold a 2-inch piece of brass like it might dissolve in his palm. "This opens a deposit box at First Cathedral Trust on Holstead," Dante said quietly. "I know because I own the box next to it. Your father cut this key himself 12 years ago, in the back room of a shop on Grand Avenue, for a man who paid him in cash and told him never to ask questions. That man was you. That man was my father." Dante set the key down carefully like it was evidence at a crime scene, which Mara was beginning to understand it was. Danny Callahan wasn't just a locksmith who did occasional favors for people who needed doors opened, Mara. He was the man my father trusted to build the one system nobody in this organization could bypass: the record vault. Ledgers. Every debt, every payment, every judge and cop on our payroll for 15 years. Locked behind mechanisms only your father understood how to build and only 2 keys could open. Mara's mouth had gone dry. "That's not, my father was a locksmith. He fixed doors. He wasn't part of anything. He built the vault that kept my father's entire empire honest to itself, because a man like my father couldn't trust his own captains not to steal from him, but he trusted a stranger with no stake in the family at all." Dante's voice had dropped into something rawer than she'd heard from him yet. "Your father knew things that could have ended 3 different men's careers, mine included, if they'd ever gotten out. And 9 years ago, right around the time somebody inside my organization started quietly moving money that never showed up in any ledger, your father died in a car accident that was ruled an accident in 11 hours, which is 11 hours faster than any accident report in this city's history." The room tilted, just slightly, the way rooms do when 9 years of grief gets handed a name it never had before. "You think someone killed him?" "I think someone killed him because he found something in those ledgers he wasn't supposed to find, and I think whoever it was has spent 9 years terrified that he told you before he died." Dante looked at her, and for the first time there was something almost like guilt sitting behind the careful stillness of his face. "I think that's also why 3 men in gray suits tried to lure me into a lobby 3 weeks ago, the same week you started working banquets in my ballroom again after 2 years away. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think somebody finally noticed you were close enough to me to be dangerous to them, and decided to remove both problems at once. You're saying I'm not just a witness. I'm the reason this started. I'm saying you were always the reason. You just didn't know it yet." Dante exhaled, and something in his shoulders, always so deliberately composed, dropped half an inch. "I've spent 9 years assuming your father took whatever he knew to his grave. I never once considered he might have left the door open for someone to find it later. I should have. I owed him that much. Why would you owe a locksmith anything?" Dante's jaw worked once before he answered. Because when I was 19 and my father was dying, and half my own family was maneuvering to take the organization out from under me before I was old enough to hold it, your father was the one man in this city who could have sold that vault's location to any of them for more money than I've made in the 10 years since. He didn't. He came to my father's hospital room and told him the vault would stay locked until I was ready to be trusted with it, and not one day sooner. That's the kind of loyalty men in this business die for and rarely receive. I've spent 9 years wondering if I ever thanked him properly before he died. He looked at her steadily. I don't think I did. Mara sat down slowly on the arm of her own couch, the brass key suddenly heavier in her memory than it had ever been in her hand. 9 years of grief reorganized itself around a new shape. Not a random accident, not bad luck, but a debt someone had been unwilling to let live. Her father hadn't just died. He'd been erased by someone who was still right now, somewhere inside Dante Moretti's own organization, close enough to have arranged 3 strangers in gray suits and a fake fire alarm 3 weeks ago. Who? Mara said, and her voice had lost its shake entirely, replaced by something colder. Who inside your family would have wanted my father dead badly enough to make it look like an accident, and wanted you dead badly enough to fake a fire alarm? Dante didn't answer immediately, and the silence told her more than words could have. Whoever it was, he already had a name in his head. He simply wasn't ready yet to say it out loud, and that hesitation, more than anything he'd told her all night, was the first time Mara understood exactly how dangerous the truth was about to become for both of them. She thought back, unwillingly, over the last 3 weeks, and pieces she hadn't known were pieces began sliding into place with a click that made her stomach drop. The heavy-set head of security, Ruiz, replaced without explanation the same week she'd been rostered back onto East Wing banquets after 2 years away. The 3 gray-suited strangers who'd known exactly where the fire panel was, as though someone had drawn them a map. The man at table 6 who'd known, within days, that she'd started talking to Dante Moretti, information that had only ever existed inside rooms controlled by people Dante trusted. None of it had felt connected while it was happening. All of it felt like the same hand now. Marchetti, she said quietly, the name of the tall man from the ballroom rising unbidden. The one who wanted you in the lobby. He works for you. He's worked for my family for 6 years. My father promoted him himself. Dante's voice had gone very flat. The particular flatness Mara now understood was how he sounded when something had cut him somewhere he didn't let anyone see. If it's him, he didn't act alone. He doesn't have the rank to reroute security rosters or requisition new men without someone above him signing off. Someone I trust enough that I never thought to look at them twice. Then look now, Mara said. Before they finish what they started with my father. Dante picked the brass key back up off the table, turned it once between his fingers like a man rereading a sentence he'd missed the first time, and for the first time since she'd met him 3 weeks ago, Mara watched something that looked almost like fear cross his face. Not for himself, she realized, but for her, for what it would cost both of them once the vault her father built finally opened. The safe house was supposed to be the one place in the city nobody could touch her. It sat on a quiet street of brownstones in a neighborhood Mara had never had reason to visit, guarded by 2 of Cesari's men around the clock, its address known, Dante had told her, to exactly 6 people. She'd been moved there the morning after the conversation about the key. Once Dante decided that whoever inside his organization had orchestrated her father's death and the fake fire alarm might now consider her the last loose thread worth cutting. For 4 days it worked. Mara slept without the SUV headlights sweeping her ceiling every hour, 8 meals Cesari's men brought up without comment, and spent the daylight hours going through a small waterproof folder Dante had recovered from the deposit box her father's key finally opened. Pages of numbers and initials that meant nothing to her yet but visibly changed the color of Dante's face when he read them the first time. On the 5th night, the guard rotation was late. Mara noticed before she understood why it mattered. The 2 men who should have changed shift at 8 were still in the hallway at 8:20, and one of them, a quiet younger man named Pharaoh who'd twice brought her coffee without being asked, kept checking his phone in a way that had nothing to do with boredom. "Everything okay?" she asked when he passed her door a third time. "Fine," Pharaoh said too quickly, not meeting her eyes, and Mara's father's old instincts, the ones that had kept a locksmith's daughter alive on instinct alone for 9 years, rose up cold and sure. Something was wrong with this man right now in this hallway. She didn't call Cesari's number first. She called Dante directly, the private line he'd given her only 3 days earlier, and said only, "Something's wrong with Pharaoh," before the line went dead. Not disconnected, cut, the particular dead silence of a jammed signal rather than a lost one. By the time she understood what was happening, the front door downstairs had already opened without an alarm, because someone with legitimate access had let them in. Marchetti came up the stairs first, and behind him, the second man, the one Pharaoh had clearly been waiting on, was someone Mara recognized instantly and with a lurch of genuine betrayal. Cesare. Cesare, who had walked her home, who had checked her stairwell, who had told her, half-joking, that his job was to keep her breathing long enough for Dante to figure out what to do with her. "You," Mara said, backing toward the window with nowhere useful to go. "You're the one who's been." "I liked you," Cesare said, and it might have even been true, which somehow made it worse. "That's not nothing in this business. But my sister owes money to people who don't forgive debts, Mara, and Marchetti's people offered to make it disappear in exchange for one thing. Keep Dante out of that lobby's shadow long enough for someone to finish what your father almost exposed 9 years ago, and afterward, clean up whatever loose ends the old vault left standing." "My father." "Your father found records that would have ended careers belonging to men who are still very much alive, still very much powerful, still very much unwilling to go to prison over paperwork from 15 years ago. Cesare said it almost gently, the way you'd explain an inevitability to a child. He wasn't supposed to have a daughter smart enough to be dangerous later. That was the mistake. Nobody accounted for you." Marchetti moved past him toward the folder on the desk, the pages Dante had spent 4 days decoding, and Mara understood with a clean cold clarity of true fear that this was never only about killing Dante. It was about erasing, completely and permanently, the last proof of whatever her father had died protecting, along with everyone who now knew it existed. "Pharaoh's downstairs making sure nobody interrupts us," Cesare said. "Dante's 20 minutes out minimum, because I made sure his driver took the long route from the deposit bank. That gives us time." "Time for what?" "For you to hand over anything else your father left you. And then, unfortunately, for this to look like the kind of accident nobody investigates too closely. Your father taught me that lesson too, in a way. Some deaths are meant to stay quiet." Mara's hands found the small waterproof folder before she'd consciously decided to move, and some old animal calculation, the same one that had once made her cross a ballroom toward the most dangerous man in the city instead of walking away, told her that the only leverage she had left was the thing they wanted most. "If I destroy this right now," she said, backing toward the window, folder held over the small trash can where a lit candle still burned from dinner, "there's nothing left to protect. No reason to kill me. No reason to kill Dante. Just 2 men who broke into a safe house for nothing." Marchetti's jaw tightened. Cesare, to his credit, looked almost admiring. "You'd burn the only thing that proves what happened to your own father. I'd rather burn it than watch you use it to bury him twice." Her voice shook, but her hand didn't. "Get out, or I put it in the flame right now." It was a bluff built on nothing but nerve, the kind of thing her father might have called reading the room before the room reads you. And for 3 long seconds it worked exactly as well as a bluff like that could ever work against 2 armed men who had already decided the night would end badly for her regardless. Marchetti didn't wait for the standoff to resolve itself. He crossed the room in 2 strides and closed his hand around Mara's wrist, wrenching it away from the candle before the folder could touch the flame, and the pages scattered across the floor in a wash of numbers and initials that had cost her father his life and were now, for one horrible moment, entirely out of her control. "Enough," Marchetti said, and there was nothing performative left in his voice now, only the flat efficiency of a man finishing a job. Cesare. Phone. Cesare hesitated. 1 full second, long enough that Mara would remember it later as the first crack in what she'd assumed was total loyalty to whoever was paying him. And in that hesitation, Mara understood something else. Whatever guilt had bought his silence about her father, it had not yet fully bought his willingness to watch her die in front of him. "We don't need her dead," Cesare said. "Just quiet. Just gone from the city." That was the deal. The deal changed the moment she called Dante directly on a line only 6 people know exists, Marchetti said, and pulled a gun from beneath his jacket, unhurried, the way a man reaches for a tool he's used before and expects to use again. "Which means one of those 6 people is a problem I intend to solve tonight, one way or another." Mara's back hit the window frame. Below, faintly, she could hear it now too. The low engine growl of vehicles moving fast on a quiet residential street, growing louder, and Marchetti's head turned sharply toward the sound with an expression that finally, for the first time all night, looked something like fear. "That's not 20 minutes, Cesare said quietly. "No," Marchetti agreed. "It isn't." He raised the gun anyway, because men who have already decided a night will end badly rarely change course simply because the timeline has shortened, and Mara had exactly the length of one indrawn breath to understand that the choice in front of her, burn the truth or keep it and possibly die for it, had just become the only thing standing between her and whatever came through that door in the next 90 seconds. Then Cesari's phone buzzed once, sharp in the tense quiet, and his face changed as he read the screen. The guards downstairs, someone Mara would later learn, had just radioed that a convoy of black SUVs had turned onto the street 8 minutes ahead of schedule, headlights sweeping the brownstones like searchlights, because Dante Moretti, upon losing contact with a woman he had sworn to protect, had not waited for his driver to find the correct route back at all. The convoy hit the brownstone street like a floodlight sweeping across a stage, headlights washing over parked cars and darkened windows until 9 black SUVs sat crooked across the road, engines still running, doors already open before the vehicles had fully stopped. Marchetti's gun was still raised when the front door downstairs blew inward off its hinges. Below, Ferro didn't fire a single shot. Whatever loyalty he'd been bought with hadn't been worth dying for, and he raised both hands the moment Dante's men flooded the entryway, 3 of them peeling off up the stairwell at a run while the rest secured the exits and the street outside with a speed that told Mara this had happened before, or had at least been trained for 1,000 times in the abstract. "Marchetti!" Dante's voice came from the doorway itself, not shouted, never shouted, and somehow that made it worse, made every man in the room straighten like the air pressure had changed. He was still in the same coat from the deposit bank, no weapon visible, standing in a doorway as though he owned the exact molecules of air inside it. "Put it down." "You don't want me to," Marchetti said, gun still trained on Mara, sweat at his hairline the only sign that the calm was costing him something now. "Because the moment I'm in your custody, I start talking, and everything I say gets you exactly as buried as your father's old ledgers were supposed to keep you protected from." "Then talk now," Dante said. "Save us both the trouble." "Cesare," Marchetti said without looking away from Mara. "Gun." Cesare didn't move. It was such a small thing, a man simply standing still in a room where everyone else was rearranging themselves around a gun, that Mara almost missed how much it mattered until she saw Dante's eyes flick to Cesare and stay there, reading something in his posture that told him, faster than words could have, exactly how deep this betrayal went and exactly how deep it didn't. "You knew," Dante said quietly to Cesare, not a question. "I knew about the fire alarm. I knew about her father." Cesari's voice had none of its usual ease left in it. "I didn't know they'd bring a gun into a room with her in it. That wasn't the deal I made." "There is no version of this where you made a deal that ends clean," Dante said, and something about the flatness of it, the total absence of the anger Mara had half expected, made it land harder than shouting ever could have. "You'll answer for what you did. But right now, you're going to decide whether you finish making it worse, or whether you help me end it." For 3 seconds, nobody in the room moved, and Mara understood, with the strange clarity fear sometimes grants, that the entire outcome of the next several years, hers, Dante's, an organization built on debts and silence going back decades, was balancing on whatever Cesare chose to do with his hands in the next breath. It was Mara who broke the stillness, though not with her voice. Past Marchetti's shoulder, through the window behind him, she could see a fourth man crouched near the fire escape of the building opposite, phone pressed to his ear, mouth moving in short clipped shapes she'd been reading instinctively since she was a child sitting too far from the television with the sound turned low. She caught 3 words before he ducked out of sight again. Second team, ready, wait, and understood, faster than anyone else in that room possibly could, that Marchetti wasn't the only contingency Dante's enemies had built into tonight. "There's another man across the street," she said, low and fast, not moving her eyes from the window. "Fire escape, 2nd floor. He's coordinating a second team." He said wait, which means whatever they're waiting for hasn't happened yet. Dante's head turned a fraction toward the window, and something in his stance shifted, recalculating in real time. Which means Marchetti's not the trigger. He's the delay. He said it to his men as much as to Mara, and 2 of them peeled silently toward the stairwell and the roof access without waiting to be told twice, because a man like Dante Moretti built an organization out of people who understood an order the first time it was given. They wanted him to hold this room until the second team was in position, Mara said, piecing it together the way she'd once pieced together an engineer's missing master key and a stranger's whisper into a radio. Which means the second they realize you're already inside, they'll either abort, or they'll force the timeline early rather than let Marchetti take the fall alone. "Then we don't give them the choice," Dante said, and it was that sentence, more than any gun in the room, that finally seemed to break something loose in Cesare. The recognition, arriving late but arriving, that everyone's still capable of choosing which side of this to stand on needed to choose now, immediately, with nothing left to hide behind. Word came back from the roof less than 2 minutes later. The second team, for men positioned across the street and along the fire escape, had scattered the instant they saw Dante's convoy blocking both ends of the road, choosing retreat over a fight they hadn't been paid enough to lose. It wasn't the clean capture Dante would have preferred, but it confirmed everything Mara's 3 whispered words had already told him. Marchetti had never been the whole plan, only the piece of it standing closest to the woman they'd all underestimated. Cesare moved first, faster than Marchetti expected, faster than Mara herself had time to flinch from, driving his shoulder into Marchetti's gun arm and forcing the barrel toward the ceiling as the shot went wide, plaster raining down in a small white cloud. And in the half-second of chaos that followed, 3 of Dante's men were already across the room, and Marchetti was face down against the floorboards with his own weapon kicked out of reach before he'd finished cursing. Mara's knees finally gave out, not from injury, just from the sudden absence of the thing that had been holding her upright. Pure nerve, running out all at once, and she sat down hard against the windowsill, the scattered pages of her father's folder still drifting across the floor around her like snow that had forgotten how to melt. Dante crossed the room and knelt in front of her before he said a single word to anyone else, checking her hands, her face, the wrist Marchetti had wrenched, with a focus so total that for a moment the rest of the room, Marchetti restrained, Cesare standing frozen with his own fate suddenly uncertain, Pharaoh handcuffed downstairs, simply ceased to exist for him. "I'm fine," Mara said, though her voice shook enough that neither of them fully believed it. "You almost burned the only proof of what happened to your father to keep it out of their hands," Dante said, something raw finally breaking through the careful stillness he wore like armor. "You'd have done that, wouldn't you?" "I'd rather it be ash than a weapon in their hands," Mara said. "Some things are worth more destroyed than owned by the wrong person." Dante looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face suggested he was hearing an echo of a sentence her father might have said to his own father decades earlier, in a hospital room, about a vault nobody was ready to open. It took the rest of that night, and most of the next, to unmake the machinery Marchetti and his backers had built. The ledger pages, once fully assembled by 2 forensic accountants Dante trusted with his life and very little else, named exactly 3 men still active in the organization's upper ranks who had spent 15 years quietly siphoning payments meant for judges and officials into accounts of their own, and who had recognized 9 years ago that Danny Callahan's vault contained proof enough to end them all if it was ever fully opened.